Hi all, welcome to Cyber Warfare Lab's AWS Cloud Red Team course. In this module, we will discuss about S3, means Simple Storage Services. So we divided this module into three sections. The first one we will discuss about introductions, what is S3, then what are the components just like S3 resources, bucket, object and all these things. Then what are the policy, how we can protect for unauthorized access, and after that we'll discuss about how we can perform a red teaming operations or how we can exfiltrate the data from the S3 buckets. So let's start one by one. Okay, so first thing we will discuss about introductions. What is S3? So S3 basically is a AWS simple storage services that allows users to store and retrieve any amount of data at any time from anywhere on the web. So basically they store your files there in S3. It's allowed to store all type of file format which is called as an object. So basically you can store any type of file format there in S3, and whatever thing you store as a file it's called as an object. So you can see here in this screen, this is the S3 bucket. So suppose this is the S3 services. In S3 services we have two things. One is bucket and second one we have an object. So basically bucket seems like it's a folder. We can store folder and files inside this folder. So bucket will be the topmost thing, and inside the bucket we can store the files as well as folder. The file which is stored there is called object. So you can see here in S3 services we have two things. One is bucket, which will basically hold all files or folder, and the object is basically the name of the file. So basically object is you can see the file which is stored there in the bucket is called object. What operations we can do here? So you can see here either a users or other AWS services, just like any other services, EC2 or roles, what operation they can perform. So these are the operations. First, they can perform the list operations. That means they can list it down all the objects as well as all the buckets there in AWS environment. Second one is get operations. So when we're talking about get operation, that means they can retrieve all the object informations as well as what is the content basically this object have. Third one is they can perform the put operations. They can create a bucket, they can create the object, or they can upload the objects. And then delete operations. So basically they can delete the bucket as well as they can delete the objects. So all the four operations it's mentioned here can be performed. These are the four operations can be performed on an object or on a bucket as well as on a object. So this is how these are the operations, and these operations will be performed by either a users or a AWS services, maybe roles, EC2 instance, Lambda function, or any other AWS services. So these are the options can be performed here on a bucket level as well as object level. So I think you clear what is a bucket. Bucket basically contain a list of object, and what is the object? Object basically it's the file which you store there in S3. Okay, so let's discuss how it's look like practical. So suppose I already logged in to my AWS management console. You can click on the S3 section, simple storage, and you can see here it will show you list of bucket there in this particular account. It will also see, you can also see there is a bucket which is there in a region basis. So this dashboard will show you all the buckets there in all the regions in AWS. Because when you click here in the global section, you can see you no need to specify the region. It will list it down all the bucket in each and every region in AWS. So these are the buckets. So basically these are the folder when we say, and these bucket can store or can have the bucket folder as well as objects. So you can see these are the bucket. You can create a new bucket. You have to specify the name and you have to specify the region, and you can create the bucket. So suppose we have AWS Red Team bucket. In this bucket we have three things. One is this This is called object, this is a folder, and this is also an object. So there is two files and one folder. Inside the folder, this is the file. So folder here is doesn't matter, so it's not basically useful. Only useful is the bucket name as well as the object. So you can see here, this is the object, this is the object, and there is two more objects there in this particular bucket. So only object and bucket is identified here in this particular AWS environment or AWS S3 environments. So let's move to the next point. So you can perform all the operations there on the bucket level as well as object level. Okay. So now what next? AWS S3 resources. So what is the basically resources? How we can identify what are the things is what? So you can see here, suppose this is the bucket. Bucket name is look like this one. HTTPS, the bucket name you can specify. Suppose AWS Red Team, this is the bucket name. And this is the S3. This here you can specify the regions. So basically, whatever reason you create the bucket will be specified here in awsamazon.com. So let's see how it's look like. Suppose let's click on this, and this is, let's open this one. So this is the entire object which we are going to retrieve, but we don't have a permission. So you can see how it's look like. So you have HTTPS. This is the bucket name. You can choose whatever bucket you want to have, but it should be available there. So this is the bucket name, this is the S3, this is the reason where you have this bucket. This is really important. If you found these URL using your OSINT activity, you should understand about where this bucket, what region they contain, what is the username here. Generally, for a red team operations, when you're going to retrieve for a bucket, company have their identity or their name as a bucket name. Suppose Google have a google.s3. Generally, it's not all the case. Microsoft have a Microsoft, Amazon have a Amazon.s3. some bucket name. It's not. It's basically if you have XYZ company, they should be like that as xyz.s3.useast.amazonaws.com. And second thing, you can also brute force this reason part. So one thing you can brute force the bucket name part, and second one you can brute force the reason name part. So you can see all the available reasons and you can brute force. Maybe there may be a chance that bucket is not available or bucket is not present in US East 1, but bucket can be accessible or bucket is there in US East 2. Let's see if there is any bucket. So you can see here there is no bucket here in this particular region. It is there in US East 2. So this is how you can identify in what region bucket have. If you are doing any brute forcing or OSINT activity, this is really important techniques to understand. So in this case, this is the identification of the bucket. This is the bucket ID. This is the region. So you can see here this is called a bucket. So this is the bucket name, which is identified as a bucket. Now what about the object? So you can see here in this example, object are the fundamental entities stored in Amazon S3. So whatever you're going to store is physically, fundamentally, which is called an object. So object basically is a file. So whatever extension or whatever format they have, but it's a file basically. So you can see here in this example, this is the bucket name, this is the bucket name, this is the region, and this is the object. So suppose you have a file like here, you have a redteam.txt. So redteam.txt is a file in this case, and this is called object. So this file redteam.txt is a file, and this is called an object. So you identify this is called a bucket, and this is called an object in S3 environment, because this is really important when you're going for discuss. In this second example, you can see here, this is the object. Suppose this whole thing is basically, this is the object, and when you consider whole thing, it's basically defined as a key. Let's discuss in this point. So you understood about bucket is the first name, the name which is mentioned here is called bucket name. Object which is there in the at the end. So basically the format, the file format is basically called an object. What is key? This is really important. What is key? So key is a unique identifier for an object within a bucket. What does it mean? You can see here. Suppose in this environment, this S3 bucket, I have one file. This is, you can see here, this is AWS text, is the same file which is there inside of this folder 1, and there is one more file with the same file which is there in AWS text. When we're talking about the object, so AWS text have, so basically this is the object as well as this is also an object. But how we can differentiate in those things? It is the same, but how we can differentiate? Or you can have a same name, but how you can differentiate into these things? Okay, so let's copy this one. And let's copy aws.txt. You can see you can't able to see the content, but there are two files. One is directly stored there in bucket, and another one is stored there in the folder. So when we're talking about key for this particular thing, this is the key. aws.text, the bucket object itself a key here. So aws.text is a key for this particular object. But in this case, this is the object. aws.text is the object, but it's not uniquely identified because there is two objects which is the same name. It can't be possible. So that means in this case, this is the key. The full thing is a key, and AWS text is the object. So when we're talking about the key for this object, the folder 1/AWS text, which is uniquely identified in the bucket. You can have a different bucket with the same name, but in the same bucket, if you have a same name, you should be have one unique key. For this particular object, we have a folder 1/AWS text is a key. For this particular object, we have the name as a key. So this is how we can identify uniquely for two objects, even if they have a same name. But it's not the case that aws.text should be there in the same place. Suppose this is there in the folder 1 and this is there in the root bucket, that is okay, but you cannot store the same thing in the same, because key basically should be a unique for each and every object. So there is a two object which is the same name, but key is different for both the object. So this is how the key is identified. So you can see here we have object 3.jpg, but when we're talking about the key, the full thing will be the key for this particular object. So it's basically a uniquely identifier for an object. That's cool. We understood about bucket, we understood about object, we understood about key. Now reason. So as we already discussed, so basically reason is a geographical where S3 will store the bucket that we create. So you can create the bucket in any region, whatever you want, or wherever you want, but it should be, you should be defined here. So in what region you should store this bucket. And it's really important, if you have suppose a VPC or private VPC, and you want to access this bucket, you have to create the endpoint in this. So VPC should be there in the same region where your bucket is there, because bucket is only accessible from the internet. But if your VPC is a private, it should be there in the same region, so they can access the bucket using VPC endpoint, one of the services by VPC, AWS. So this is really important about the region, because the region we choose, AWS store our data. So suppose if you are in US region, you basically choose the US region to store your data. If you are in Asia region, you have to choose the Asia region to store your data. And this is the case for all the companies. So this is how region is really important. So in this case, this bucket have US East, North Virginia region, and this is the region name US East 1. But this bucket have a US East Ohio, and this is the region name US East 2. That means you can have a bucket in multiple regions according to your policy, or according to the whatever regulations you have in your country or in your organizations. So this is how you identify what are the reason is there. But when you accessing the bucket on the using command line or using any this web portal, it will show all the reasons there. Just like if you're accessing the EC2 instance, you have to define the reason. In what region you want to basically explore the EC2 instance, but for a bucket you no need to define the reason. So it will by default listed down all the bucket which is available on all the regions. So that's all about what are the resources there for this. Now what next? Access policy. This is really important. So basically how we can protect unauthorized access, or how we can give the permissions to a role, to a users, so they can access the bucket, they can access the objects. So this is a really important. So you can see here S3 have a two type of policies. One is a resource based policy and another one is identity based policy. So first we will discuss about the resource based policy. So basically what is a resource based policy? So resource based policy are attached to a resource. For example, S3 bucket or object. With resource based policy, you can specify who has access to the resource and what actions they can perform on it. And what about the identity based policy? So identity based policy are attached to IAM users, groups or role. These policy let you specify what that identity you can do. So you understood. So what is the basic difference between resource based policy as well as identity based policy is resource based policies are attached directly to the resource. So that means you can attach resource based policy to S3 bucket as well as object. But other hand, identity based policy we can attach to a users, to a groups or a role. So these are the difference between a resource based policy and identity based policy. When you're talking about S3, what are the resource based policies? So basically resource based policy here in four types. One is public access, second one is ACL, third one is bucket policy, and fourth one is time limited URL. So basically two things is really important here. ACL, access control list, so you can define the access control list on the bucket level as well as object level. So access control list can be applied on the bucket level as well as object level. So basically these are the resource based policy which can be applied. Under the resource based policy we have a ACL. Basically why it's called resource based policy, because ACL is applied for a bucket level or object level, that means for a resource level. And second thing, we have a bucket policy. So basically bucket policy can only be attached or can only be applied to a bucket level. So these are the difference between ACL and bucket policy. What about the public access? So public access is type of restrictions. Basically when you put this thing, your all policy will be, that means if you applied public access, your all policy, whatever you define in ACL or whatever define in bucket policy will not be eligible. That means it won't, it will be useless. It will be not effective if you put the public access there. So basically public access can control all your bucket ACL policy as well as bucket policy. And what is the time-based URL? So basically it's a pre-signed URL where you can define the time. So suppose there is one object, you can generate a time-based URL, you can send to the users, user can access this thing, you can define the time. So even if user doesn't have a rights to access it, by default there will be a URL is automatically generated and you can define the time. So after some time the token which is there in the URL itself will got expired. So, and now we're talking about identity based policy. So it's very simple. So it's like we are not attaching or we are not defining any policy on the bucket level or object level. We directly attaching this policy to the users. That means this user can access this bucket, or this user can access what operation this user, this role or this group can perform on these bucket or as well as object. So this is how you can define the policy basis of identity. So let's discuss in deeply what is a resource-based policy. Okay, so you can see here in this diagram, we have two type of policies basically we discussed. The first, this is the permissions, basically what permissions you can define. So we have a resource-based policy. This is the resource-based policy we have a user-based policy. User-based policy means, or we can say identity-based policy basically. You can define to I am user, group or role. So it's very simple, just like we define that this user can perform this option or operation on S3, or this user can perform this operation on S3. When we're talking about S3, that means it's a object level as well as bucket levels. This is very, very simple. But when we're talking about resource-based policy, there is two type of resource-based policy. One is ACL and second one is bucket policy. So basically bucket policy can only be attached to a bucket, but ACL can be attached to a bucket as well as object. So you can define the access control list for an object and bucket, what actions they can do or what action they cannot do. But bucket based policy or bucket policy, you can define what is the condition is met, then they can perform this action. So here you can specify the condition. That's the difference between ACL and bucket policy. In bucket policy, you can define the conditions. Suppose if your request is coming from this source, this will be applicable. This is you can define on the bucket based policy, but ACL you can define what actions this particular or users group or particular principal can perform on the bucket level as well as object level. We will discuss in practically how it's look like, what we can do. So let's try on the practical hands how we can do or how we cannot do. So you can see here we have three buckets here. So these are the bucket which is there in different reasons. So let's talk about this bucket, AWS Red Team bucket. Let's talk about this bucket only. So let's open this bucket. You can see this is the bucket name, and these are the files or folder, or we can say object there in this particular bucket. How we can define the policies? We are discussing about resource-based policy. In resource-based policy section, this is the policy. We are discussing about this resource-based policy. In this policy, we can define ACL or we can define the bucket policy. So let's first discuss about ACL. So basically this is the bucket and these are the objects there in this particular bucket. How we can set the ACL? So ACL can be implemented bucket level as well as object level. So you can see here we can define the ACL on the bucket level as well as object level. Let's discuss. So this is the bucket. Let's first discuss about how we can define the object, how we can define the ACL on bucket level. So this is the bucket. Let's click on this bucket. So as you can see, I clicked on this bucket. This is the bucket AWS Red Team, and let's go there in permission section. We are not defining the bucket or not defining the ACL on the object level. We are defining on the bucket level. When we go down, you can see there is one thing. This is called bucket policy. Here you can specify the policy, but we are discussing about bucket or ACL. This is the ACL. So you can define what actions who can perform, and you can on the bucket level. So you can see here there is a 4 sections: bucket owner, who create this bucket, what action they can do. There is 2 things: one is objects level and second one is bucket ACL. So they can list it down all the object as well as they can write the object. All these things we are discussing about bucket level, but in bucket what they can do. So they can list it down all the objects or all the objects there in this particular bucket, as well as they can upload a new object there, and this is applicable for this bucket owner who creates this bucket. So this is the by default. And bucket ACL, so basically they can change the access control list. They can read the access control list and they can write the access control list. Who? Bucket owner. Now this is really important. everyone means public access. Public access means suppose if you store any file, or suppose you store any study material in your S3 bucket and you allow everyone to read this file, so that means this is called a public access. You allow everyone to perform whatever action you want. So when we're talking about public access on the bucket level, what they can do, so this is the public level. So they can list it down. That means they can list down all the objects there in this particular bucket. Second thing, they can also read the ACL. So by default, they cannot read what is the permission we set, what is the ACL we set on the bucket level. But if we define, they can this thing. Second thing, we can define the authenticated user group. That means if you have AWS account, you already authenticate in your account, what options they can do here. Same, list or read. And last one is they can define the S3 delivery group. So if you deliver the logs, what operation they can do here. But this is the really important here in public access, because what happens generally, organizations, they have a bucket, they store their files, their software, or anything on the bucket and allow the users to download this thing. But sometimes they store their critical data there, and if they not properly configured it, that means anybody can download or anybody can view the content of this thing. So suppose what I'm going to do, I'm going to specify the ACL on the bucket level. So let's click here. That means everyone can view the list of object there in this particular bucket. Let's click here and save this one. You can see here in this section, this user or everyone have a list rights here. List rights means they cannot upload anything, cannot upload any object, but they can view all the objects there in this particular bucket. So let's go. What is the bucket name? So we have bucket name is AWS Red Team. AWS Red Team. This is the bucket. You can see here all the objects you can view here. You can view all the objects there in this particular bucket. But let's see if we are able to get the content or read the content. aws.txt. You cannot, because what permission is assigned to this bucket is bucket level. They can, or anyone can list it down all the objects, because this is the permission they are applicable on the bucket level. And what operation we can do in the bucket level, we can list it down only. We cannot get the content. When you're talking about the content, definitely we have to define ACL on the object level. So this is, you understood what we did. Let's change this one. Let's see if we are able to remove this one. Save the changes. Now again, just see whatever or how many objects are there. You see access denied. That means I remove the permissions, which is their list permissions, and I cannot even view the list of objects there in this particular bucket. So this is how you can define the ACL on the bucket level. What about object level? So you can also define the ACL, because here you can see ACL can be defined on the bucket level as well as object level. So let's see, can we define the ACL on the object level? So this is the bucket, these are the object. So let's see this one. So initially let's try to access this particular object. You can see you cannot access, it's saying access denied. Let's see how we can define the permission. Now we are going for an object level. So I'm going here. And here you can see there is an access control list, which is applicable for each and every object you have. So let's copy this one. Here also we have three options here. One is object owner, who uploaded this object, who is the owner of this object. they can read the objects as well as they can read as well as write the ACL, access control, which is there. Second thing, everybody or public, they cannot do anything. Let's click on the read and save it. Let's check this one and save it. Now let's try to access this particular. Yes. So now you can see I'm able to access this particular object because I defined or I applied ACL on the object level, but I specified the ACL on this particular object. Let's try to access any other objects. Let's see how many objects are there in this particular. We have these 3 objects. Let's go red team.text. Let's try to access this one. You cannot access because you only define this ACL or public access to this particular object, and the name of object is AWS red team, aws.text file. So this is how you can define the ACL on the object level. You can define the ACL on the bucket level as well as you can define the object on the ACL level. Object level. But suppose when we're going to define ACL on the bucket level, there is one operation only. That means you can list it down the objects in the particular bucket, or you can view the ACL which is defined there, this particular bucket. But when you're going for an object level, there is a get operation. That means you can only list down this object. That means the content you can list it down. What is the content there, or what is the content have this particular object. So this is how you can define the ACL on individual bucket as well as individual object. So you understood what is the difference between ACL on the bucket level as well as object level. There is one more thing that we discuss here. It's called public access. What is this one? So suppose if you allowed here that this person can access this object, or anybody, because it's a public access, anybody can access or view the content of this object. Suppose you have a 10,000 similar objects there or file there, and few files you found that few files have few files have a confidential information or secret information. What you can do, you have to go for each and every file or each and every object and you have to remove this permission. But AWS there is one interesting thing that's called public access, which is introduced later on when some organization is breached due to this fact that they first define that they can access this object as a publicly, but after that they realize there is a sensitive information there in this object and they have to uncheck it by going each and every object individually or each and every ACL of the object individually. But there is one case, so you can see here when you click on this bucket in the permission sections, there is one interesting thing is block all public access. So even suppose I'm edit this one, this is for ACL. That means if there is any existing ACL which is there on this particular bucket, this bucket can, or anybody can access this bucket or view the content of this bucket. Or if you create, so this is basically for new access control list. If you're going for create a new access control list where you define that public or anybody can access this, or anybody can view the bucket, or anybody can access this bucket, it's basically access bucket as well as object. Or if there is a predefined, so in this case we already defined this thing that public can access this bucket or content of this particular object. If you uncheck this one, or if you check this one and save it here, let's confirm this one. Now what happened, even if you define there in the object level, you cannot access it. Why? Because the public access will apply each and everything on bucket level as well as object level. So if your public access is blocked here, even if you create a new policy or new ACL, or if there is already permission there in the existing ACL, it won't applicable here. It's basically this block all the public access of bucket as well as object level, which is granted using new access control list or which is there in already exist access control list. So it's basically block all these things. So this is really important. Why? Because you found or going for each and every object and change the ACL, you can block every ACL until you can change for going for each and every ACL. So basically it will protect accidentally leak or expose the secret content to a public audience. So once you block it, everything will be blocked at the public level. But if you are authorized user or if you are a part of an account, then you can access it. So it's only block the public access on the. So these two for the ACL level, and these are the two for a bucket policy level. So we will discuss about what is the bucket policy and then we'll check how it's work. So you can see here how we can do or how we can define this thing on ACL level. So what we discuss is what is ACL, how we can set the ACL on the bucket level as well as object level, how we can allow access, public access, or remove public access, and at the end we discuss about the public access. There is one thing that means how we can disable all the ACL, whatever is applicable on the bucket level or object level, we can block all public access. So these are the difference, and this is really important when you're going for a red teaming, how we can enumerate the thing, because if you found that there is this block, public access is already blocked, that means for all these things you cannot do anything. That means you have to find out the other way. You have to find out the users, which is authenticated user, maybe which is the owner of this bucket, and then you can exfiltrate the information. But suppose you found that there is a public access is blocked on the ACL level, but access policy or bucket policy allow this thing. You can change the bucket policy existing there, or you can create a new bucket policy and you can exfiltrate the information and allow to public accessible the informations. So this is all about the ACL. ACL can be applied, is basically applied on the resource level, but resources can be applied on the bucket level as well as object level. So this is all things we discuss. Now we will discuss about bucket policy. What is the difference between ACL and bucket policy here? Is here you can see in ACL we have to define that what action they can do. Here just simply you have to check this one, list actions, read action, read actions, list actions, whatever actions can be performed by this particular grantees. But in access control, or we can say public bucket policy, we can do that, we can perform the actions on the condition level. That means if certain condition is met, you can access or you can block it. Suppose if you want to check this, if your request is coming from this particular source of IP, then only you can access it. Then only you can access the bucket. Or second thing, what you can do, you can apply, just like in ACL, we can define the policy in bucket level as well as object level. When you're talking about the object level, you have to go for each and every object and you have to define the read access or get access. But in bucket, you can do all the operations for all the objects which is there in this particular bucket. Because this is a policy can only be attached to the bucket, and whatever there in the bucket will be applied there. So that means if one user can want to access this thing, you can define that this user can access this bucket as well as all the content which is there. Or that means you can also define that the public can view the content, view the object of this particular bucket, as well as can view the content of object also. So this is how you can define this thing. And this is the difference, that you can define the bucket level full, or it will be inherit whatever thing you have. Second thing, you can define the conditions. If your request is coming from this particular VPC, then only you will grant this access, otherwise you won't get it. So condition based this thing, if you have a condition based thing, you can define the bucket policy. Let's see how bucket policies look like. But one thing keep in noted that bucket policy will be applicable for the bucket level, and whatever thing is there in the bucket will be applicable as well. But you cannot define there in the object level, just like we have in ACL, but it will be applicable for entire bucket. So let's see how it's look like. Suppose this is the bucket we have. This is the bucket we have. We cannot access, or we cannot see the list of content of this bucket, as well as, let's suppose we cannot view this one as well. We cannot get the content of this one as well. Now let's go here in the permission sections. This is the bucket policy. You can define the bucket policy here. Let's see. So I have bucket policy there in my, this is bucket policy look like. You can paste it here. So when we see this principle, that means it's a resource based policy by default, because in principle, in resource based policy we can define the principle. So that what this is saying, so suppose you have a sits public read, what effect, that means allow principle anybody. When we say anybody, that means it's publicly accessible. Authenticate, whatever authenticated user or whatever user can do what actions, get the object as well as get the version. They cannot list the object, they can get the object. And this is applicable for each and every object which is there in this particular bucket. When we're talking about the ACL, we have to go for each and every object and we have to define the ACL for each and every object. But here we can define this thing, this action for all the objects there in this particular bucket. Let's save this one. Perfect. This is the policy which is applicable. Now when you want to view the content of this object, yes, you are able to view the content of this object. You no need to define the ACL or on each and every object. You can define the policy, it will be applicable for each and every object. Or you can also define the object whichever you want in your resource policy, but it's up to you. But this is really helpful. Let's see. Yes. Let's see if you have anything. Folder 1. You cannot do this thing. Let's copy folder 1 / aws.text. You can see, this is the same content we have. But when we are going to list it down all the objects there in bucket, access denied, because this is not defined in this policy. We only define that get object as well as get versions, and this is applicable for this bucket only. Whatever comes in this bucket folder files will be applicable these policies. So this is how you can define the bucket policy. No need to define just like ACL for each and every object. You can define this thing for every object right from here. Now in this case also, what is this public access? So we off this one. Off means we are not going to block this public access, but let's edit this one. So you can see here I'm able to view the content because the policy allow me. But suddenly this is also the case if you found that there is a secret information and by default, or you want to disallow all the policy, resource based policy, or you want to reactivate all this policy, you can change it. So that means it will block all the public access. And here you can define this, let's copy this one. Sorry, let's remove this one. Let's copy this one. If you click on the 4, that means you can block all these things. In this case, suppose you have a policy, you define the policy here, and this policy allow me to view the content. But if you want to disallow all the content for any new policy or any other existing policy. So that means if you create a new policy, it will not allow, the policy will be inactive, it will not applicable the policy for a block public access only. Let's save this one, confirm this one, and confirm here. Now public access is blocked by default. Let's try to view the content and it's say access denied. Why? Because by default we allowed this public access, and this is really important because when you found that there is some secret information which is publicly accessible and you don't know how many files are there or how many objects are there, until you can block this one. So if you know it's not accessible, you can go there, then after you analyze, you can remove this one. So this is really important. When you suddenly found something, you can block each and every public access. Just click here. So this is for ACL. In ACL also we have a new, if you want to create a new, or if it's already there in exist, or this is for bucket policies. So this is how permission we can define. We can define the permission like that. So now I think it's all clear how we can define the permissions, the ACL as well as bucket policy. So and this is called a resource based because we directly define this thing to the resource level. Here resource is bucket as well as object. Now what about identity based policy, or we can say user based, but generally term is identity based policy. So in identity based policy, let's go here, let's click on the user sections, let's click on the IAM, click on the users. That means there is one user S3 admin, and you can directly define the policy here. What does policy say? Let's see the permissions. That means this user where this policy is attached can perform all the action in S3 on all the resources. So this is how you can define the policy on the identity level, user level, role level. Here you no need to define the principal, because principal is where we attach or whom we attach this policy. So we attach this policy to this particular user. So this policy is attached to this particular user, and this user have these right where is we define here. So this is how you can define the identity based policy. And it's also important because sometimes in our red teaming we found that suppose there is one application which is hosted on EC2, and EC2 this application have rights to, so user can upload the file. The file is initially uploaded on the application, then application have access to S3, and this application can push this file to the S3 bucket. So that means your roles, which is EC2, have a rights to access or to store or to get or put all the operation on S3 bucket. So suppose if you compromise this EC2 instance, you have all the access in S3. And this is how it's really important, because in this bucket also we define, in this bucket policy we define that star resource. That means here we can define that on what bucket they can perform these actions, but here it's star. That means this role or this user can perform all the operations on all the resource there in S3 bucket. So this is really important to analyze the policy for the bucket related. So this is how you can define it. At the end we will discuss about, so we discuss about public access, how we can disable all these things, ACL level as well as bucket level. What is ACL, how we can define it, what is bucket policy, what is identity based policy. Now this is time limited URL. This is also called pre-signed URL. So suppose we have this S3 object which is not accessible. This is the S3 object which is not accessible, but if you want to give to a user to access for a temporary purpose, how you can define it? You can click it here. So you just choose the object. Suppose this is the object which is initially not accessible, but you can generate the time-based URL. Time-based URL can only be generated using AWS CLI. So in our credential access section, we will discuss about how we can generate a time-based URL. But you can see it look like this one. So you copy, let's open this one and paste it. This is the time-based URL. So you can view the content. Here we have a security token which will be expired for certain. Now after 15 minutes or 10 minutes, which is defined there. So this is how you can identify if you have or if you found any time-based URL. Even if you don't have access, you can access this particular resource, because if they define, there is a lambda functions, and they have one file where they can access the any file from the S3 bucket. And in lambda function, they define the time-based URL. That means you can choose this time-based URL to access this thing, to access the bucket or to access the object especially, which is not accessible initially because you don't have a rights, but this allows you to access this object for a certain limited time period. So this is how it is really important for time-based URL. You can generate the time-based URL using AWS CLI. You have to define that you have this object, or you want to access this object, or you want to generate a time-based URL for this object, and you have to define the time. So it will be valid for this 1 hour, 2 hour, or 3 hour, whatever time you set, and you can generate the time-based URL. You can share this URL to anybody where you want to share this file, so they can access the particular files or object without giving the permission therein, or without giving the permission using access-based policy, either the identity-based policy or resource-based policy. So this is how a time-based URL is really important. So I think we all clear about how we can define the policy. We'll discuss in our enumeration phase how we can enumerate what policies attached to this one, if publicly block is allowed or not, how we can get the more information, what is the ACL there in particular object or particular bucket, what is the bucket policy, what is the conditions there, so that we can access it. So all these things we'll discuss in our enumeration phase, how we can do all these things using a command line utility. So here I think we all good about what is policy, what is bucket, how we can access it, how we can restrict it, what are the terminology there, and what are the operations we can perform. So this is all about this video. Thank you so much for watching this video.